Simmons College, in collaboration with the Angela Project, presents 40 Days of Prayer for the Liberation of American Descendants of Slavery. Biblically, the number 40 represents a period of testing, trial, or probation. So we are inviting you to join us in 40 Days of Prayer as we observe this 400th anniversary of enslavement in America.
Beginning July the 12th and concluding August the 20th, Christians and justice-loving people from around the world will pause to commemorate 400 years of slavery, so we might reflect on where we have been and project a new course for race relations in America.
For each of the 40 days, there will be facts surrounding slavery and Black oppression in America, and we are the voice of one prayer declarations. Also, read the actual stories of enslaved people escaping captivity through the Underground Railroad.
We who are the American descendants of slaves realize that we did not come to this country seeking a better life. We were brought against our will to help others have a better life. It's called slavery. The first woman was a woman named Angela, and that began the sad tradition of enslavement in this country. We will pause to remember their pain and project a new future.
On August 20th, at the culmination of the 40 Days of Prayer, the ceremony book will be used in services held across this nation in commemoration of this 400th year of slavery in America. So let's go global with this initiative and show the world the power of prayer. 40 days, 400 years. We are so excited that our church family is expanding. New members, we want to roll out the welcome wagon to you. It's the St. Stephen New Member Reception, August 10th, 1 p.m. at the Louisville Campus Chapel. Please RSVP with Cynthia Lisco at clisco@ssclive.org or by calling 502-583-6798, extension 1201. Be sure to save the date. A transformation is coming to this city, and it's happening right here at the Stephen. Be sure to join us Saturday, August 17th on the Louisville campus at 8:30 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. It's that time again. Time for us to take the gospel to the streets with our annual 4th Street Live Takeover. Make plans to join us again this year on Sunday, August 18th. Pass the popcorn. It's movie time. Movie night is back on Friday, July 26th, and we'll be showing Avengers: Infinity Wars. Hey Louisville, school is just about to begin again, and we're gonna bring it in with a party. The St. Stephen Kingdom Kids Sunday School Children's Ministry presents the Back to School Block Party, Saturday, August 3rd from 2 to 5 p.m. on our Louisville campus. There will be health screenings, dental screenings, supply giveaways, food, fun, and so much more. For more information, email Kim Childress at kchildress@ssclive.org.
What's really good, everybody? Welcome to Millennial Mondays, a Bible study that is for us, by us. I'm your host, Cory Bailey. I'm here with my friend, my brother from another mother, Chaz Briscoe. Definitely excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. And listen, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it, taking the time out.
Thank you for having me.
And so here real quick, couple of housekeeping notes. So the first thing is, a couple of folks reached out to me and let me know how I kind of messed up last week, because I said that Reuben was the brother and it was actually Benjamin. Now, see, what happened was I was making certain that you was reading y'all's Bible. See, that's what happened. But on the real, but no, honestly, real talk. Listen, make certain that you go back, check it out. Actually, it was Benjamin. All I was saying was that Joseph had a brother. That's all I was saying. Y'all just, look, he had a brother. Now, how about that? But no, really true. So here's the other thing. All right, so that's first housekeeping rule. The other thing is, listen, we're in the middle of the 40 days of prayer. Definitely get the book. If you have not already got the book, make certain you get it. Today we're on day 18. And so much information in there about the slave trade and about all of the different things that happened during the Middle Passage and slavery and all of those. There's so many things in there that you will most certainly get. But then also, we're doing this together. This is going across the nation. If by chance you can't get by the church to get a copy, you can get it online at Amazon. You can even get a Kindle edition if that's the case, if they're on the back order. Just make certain that you get the book, because it's awesome. Sister Sherry Mills did an excellent job just doing all the things with this book, so extremely excited about that. The other thing, this kind of like the preface for the convo today, I just want to make certain that we sort of recap. Past couple of weeks, we started with Hagar, as she was the first slave mentioned by name in the Bible. And we paralleled that with Angela, as she was one of the first slaves that was mentioned by name in the census back in 1619. So the second week, we came back and we talked about Joseph. And we talked about the life of Joseph and how he was sold into slavery by his brothers and all of that great stuff. This week, however, we're going to dive a little deeper and talk about the experience of a people, like how slavery really impacted the African-American population and just how this is constantly going, and slavery didn't necessarily end, but it was evolved. I mean, so we're really about to hit some sensitive topics. And what I really wanted to start with is the fact that, listen, I am proud to be a black man. I am proud to be a black man in America, one of the greatest countries on this planet. I am also proud of all of the accomplishments that African Americans have made throughout the years, and all of the things in which will be done, as African Americans are a beautiful people. Do not confuse black pride as a means of hate for any other race. It is most certainly just taking pride in the fact that there have been some great accomplishments. And not only that, we're just proud to be black and proud to be black in America. So we don't have to hate anybody else to love ourselves. So we're really just having a conversation. It's going to get intense. We're going to talk about some serious things. And I want to make certain that we preface that with the reality. This isn't hate for anybody else. This is pride within ourselves, as we've always loved everybody else. Now it's time for us to really look at ourselves and say, I love me too. So just wanted to start there because we're about to get into it. So Chaz, you ready?
Hey, let's go.
So listen, really quick, let me introduce my guest right here. Now, Chaz Briscoe, he currently is in California. He's studying at the University of California, Irvine, getting his doctorate in political science with an African-American concentration, the history of African-American concentration. And so I'm really excited because I wanted to get his thoughts and perspective on this topic, the experience of a people, and it's going to be great. I can't wait. Listen, so we're going to jump right into it. We're starting with Exodus chapter 1, verse 8 through 14. And so I'm going to read this really quick, and then we're going to dive in. And the scriptures say, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh's store cities, Pithom and Ramses, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all of their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves." And so here's where it gets interesting. Like I said, we talked about Joseph, we talked about Hagar, but now we're talking about a collective group of slaves. And so I guess the first question, and as we dive into that, as we look at that and parallel the conversation, could you speak to the efforts, the effects of slavery on African descendants of slavery, and how slavery, as ugly as a term as it is, hasn't necessarily been abolished? It's more an evolution of slavery as we see it today.
Exactly, right? And so I love how you frame it, right? It's an evolution. And so one of the things I always love starting with, kind of when we start these discussions, when I have these discussions, right, is how do we talk about slavery within its historical context, right? And so in particular, I'm thinking of, even taking something from biblical, sort of understandings and biblical times, right? How do we then understand then the modern transatlantic slave trade, right? Because we're talking about two different histories of slavery. And so particularly for this conversation, right, how do we talk about then this modern sort of understanding of slavery? And what I really want to tie to that, right, is that when we talk about prior forms of slavery, what we're really talking about is how, people might have been caught up in war and this geographic proximity, right? I pull you in and you pull me in, right? This sort of like tribal sort of kind of interactions, I guess, of slavery, right? But when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, the critical thing, right, is that this is the first time, right, particularly if we're talking about Angela, that it's not only for the fact that she is a slave, but the fact that she's also Black, right? And so now we have this conversation of race. And I think that changes the complexity of then what happens to us, as Black people in this country, right? And so the American project then unfolds out of that, right? And so one of the things I remember I read somewhere and that I loved, right, is that you were Black because you were a slave, and you were a slave because you were Black.
Wow.
Right? And so how do then these two things become melded to each other, right? This position, this structural position gets melded to each other, right? And so then the modern kind of, I guess, conversation of the evolution of slavery really does come out of this point of 1619, but also this American project, right? How does this kind of wrap with the founding of this country, with the economic piece, with so many different pieces of this conversation?
Right. Most certainly. And I think one of the things in which is really important that we look at is how, especially from this Bible, or Exodus 1:8 Bible, where the story gives us, it says that the Egyptians were afraid of the Israelites because they were becoming so numerous. They were becoming so great in number. And it almost makes me wonder, like, what about the conversation around the border and how, like, there are some controls placed around the border and because when you see the images of what's being done at the border and how people are packed into these rooms, it's reminiscent of slave ships and how they were just brought over and just pushed and totally neglected as a person. Like, I mean, when you think about it, does this fear of containing control, does that really play into the fact of some of the slavery and how those impacts work in today's society?
Exactly, right? And so again, I love your framing, right? So this conversation of control, right? I think to me that's where I start from, right? And so when we talk about borders, again, right, we're talking about control. When we talk about the enslavement of people, right? Like one of the things that one of my professors told me, and that I always hold on to, is that not only then do I have to put you in a position, right? So I have to mark you as a slave, right? But once then I go from that point, then I have to make that real. Right? And one of the things that he always says is making difference real, right? And so exactly what you're talking with policy, with actually the creating of borders, right? Like the conversation then explodes because not only do then I say, okay, so you are Black, so you are less than human, right? But then I also have to create institutions, right? So I have to lock you out of access to wealth. I have to lock you out from the access to education and health services, right? And so then I make it real, right? So then the institutions reaffirm this narrative that I've already created around you, right? And so then the narrative and the discourse also becomes a tool, also becomes a technology in your enslavement, right? And so that's the thing that I really, really love when you draw out that policy piece, because it wasn't just that the Egyptians had a feeling about the Israelites and they had to like position them in a certain place.
Right.
I then have to create a policy to make that position real, right? And so then how do they reinforce each other, right? And we get into this cycle and this cyclic form, and then, yeah, you look at us in 2019, how do we get out of that?
How do we get out of that? Because we're still having those same conversations, because as you mentioned, we're building on this same unfortunate American story of how to treat people and how to view people in this lens, if you will. When we look at this story, we talk about how the Israelites were enslaved. And we talk about how you go through this space and the Egyptians were looking, and Pharaoh saw this. They're just constantly multiplying. They're growing in number. And we fear that we're about to become the minority. It's reminiscent of Charlottesville, when you have a group of Klansmen and neo-Nazis and people walking through saying, Jews will not replace us. I mean, it's this thought that we're going to be replaced if, in the event, we are now outnumbered by brown people.
Exactly, right?
It's just an unfortunate situation.
And so how does, fear breed control, right? One of the things that you had mentioned briefly before, right, is this conversation of borders, right? So when I start this conversation, I always start with the Mexican-American War in 1846. And I start there, right, because the point of the Mexican-American War is the extension of slavery into Texas, right? And so automatically we're having a conversation of the extension of borders so that we can extend slavery. Right? And so these two conversations have never been separate, right? Frederick Douglass talks about this, right? And so a part of it, right, is knowing our history, getting immersed in these conversations, right? But it's also how do narratives of send her back, right, kind of become then a part of this lexicon, right? And it comes up again and again, right? I talk about the Mexican repatriation program. I talk to the Bracero program, right? So these are things that happen within our American history, right, that have been done particularly to brown people, right, through the border, right? And so the Mexican repatriation happened 1929 through 1936, right? And I use that, right, because what happened in 1929, right? The Great Depression, right? The Great Depression hit. So similarly, right, we have this conversation. I am somehow lost something that I'm entitled to, right? And so because of this Great Depression, then we have to find a scapegoat. Right? We have to then send somebody back, right? And so this becomes then the first iteration of where we see, right, send them back in this conversation. And so if this is happening in 1929, again, we've already started with 1846, then we go to 1929, right? And then we can see these conversations in 2019, right? Then we have to have a conversation of what are these narratives, and then again, how are we making these differences real, right? There's nothing different about the humanity of brown folks, of Mexican folks, right, of black people, right? There's nothing different, but I have to make that difference real.
I've got to make that difference real.
And so how do I do that? Oh, I say that they're lazy. I say that they're criminals. I say that we have this issue at the border, right? It's a crisis, right?
It's a crisis.
But, truly that we don't talk about what's happening in Central America, right? We don't talk about then this American project and what we're really invested in.
Exactly, because if I can dehumanize you, then I can delegitimize your presence and who you are. So, wow, that's crazy. I mean, that's the type of conversation, right? I mean, that's kind of like that's the crux of it, because when you begin to have that conversation, it broadens it from a perspective, especially when you start from, you see the picture in the Bible, but you broaden it out to help understand that historical perspective. Hey, this is real. This is real. This is not like biblical times, and no, this is real life happening right now. So I want to pivot real quick and move into Exodus 5:14, because then we begin to have a broader conversation that just begins to stair step on top of what we just talked about, right? So really quick, read here, it says, "But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens." They're lazy, right? "And Pharaoh said, Behold, the people of the land are too many, and you make them rest from their burdens. The same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their foremen, you shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks, as in the past. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the number of bricks they made in the past, the same shall impose on them. You shall by no means reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry, let us go offer sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid on the men that may labor at it." Let heavier work be laid on the men that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words. And just like pausing right there, you begin to see policy being made in order to make life more difficult for people who are already struggling.
Exactly.
For people who are already in a bad situation, but now I'm going to make policy now that's going to make it even tougher for you to exist.
Exactly.
I mean, so you also worked here in Louisville for a little bit for the Metro Humans.
The Kentucky Commission on Human Rights.
Kentucky Commission on Human Rights.
No.
And so as you're in that space, and not only just in that space, but just looking at the field, you know, in reference to Kentucky politics and Kentucky policy, have you seen or been made aware of any of the policies or maybe how things have just been placed in order to make life a little more difficult for folks that are not, that don't have a voice at the seat at the table?
Yeah, you know, I mean, and I love this quote, right? I'm gonna drill into this one. So this is what I do all day. You give me a passage and I'm gonna sit on it all day. Again, right? So I'm going to command of you like the same number of bricks, right? But I'm gonna take the resources and your ability, right, to then actually produce the bricks, right? And so what I draw out of that, right, is the idea that the narrative is gonna stay the same, right? You still need to produce the same amount of bricks, but I'm going to take away from you, right, all the substance and all the resources that you need to create, right, those bricks. That's what we see so often in our communities, right? Communities are constantly losing resources, right? But then we're still on the same narrative, right? That you got to be, you know, successful. We got this American dream conversation, right? But it's getting harder and harder to actually reach, right? The actual ladder, it's not even like, right? Like you're trying to climb the ladder. The ladder's being pulled out from under you.
You don't have a ladder no more.
Right?
So climb without a ladder.
Climb without a ladder, right? But then we still hold though the same standard.
Yes.
And to me, that is, I mean, I would say that to me is the devious part of this process.
Exactly.
Is that I will then use the fact that you can no longer reach this standard that I've created to then justify your oppression.
Yes.
Right? Oh, you see, that's why I told you weren't worth nothing.
Right.
Then I can reaffirm that. Then that reinforces that all over again.
Yeah.
So, I mean, here in Louisville, I'm really interested in Rubber Town. I'm really interested because to me, when I talk about the afterlife of slavery, or I get it confused with Rubber Town and Smoketown, but I'm particularly thinking about the DuPont plant, right? And so to me, I'm really interested in these conversations of environmental racism, right? Because you see, right, these plants, and then you see black communities all circle around them, right? And so to me, that looks like a plantation. You can say what you want about it, but to me that looks like a plantation. So when we talk about this afterlife of slavery, right, and how I see it in why is it okay for black communities to have 300 and 400 times the rates of cancer, and for them to put these waste sites in our communities, right? That to me is the same conversation of there's no humans involved. There's no humans here, right? And so then we can just do whatever we want. You talked about control. To me, control is being able to say, I can do whatever I want to your body. I can do whatever I want to you. Right.
And not only that, but also in relation to, say, gerrymandering, and then I can redistrict or realign the district so that when you vote, you don't necessarily even have a majority in the vote because you're becoming too numerous. So therefore, I've got to redraw the lines so that I can make it so that it looks better for us, so that we can get in office, create the policy, and then.
And then what? And then I'm going to tell you that voting then is your only way.
That's your only way.
That's your only way to actually affect change.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But then I'm going to make it so that no matter what you do, no matter how you vote,
exactly, right?
still not going to win.
Exactly. So then how do these cycles reinforce each other? I think that's important.
I think that is crazy because one of the things that what you talked about in reference to just the opportunity, and if in the event you snatch away the ladder, now I can't even climb. When you talk about what's going on in impoverished areas in Louisville, and namely, you know, one that's near and dear to our heart is the West End. When you think about the reality that there isn't much opportunity there because the investment isn't there, but yet it's always listed as high crime, right? It's easy for us to look at it. It's like an easy scapegoat, easy to blame the liquor store for all of the issues, when in fact, if we were to invest in other stuff, then therefore, man, there wouldn't be as many liquor stores because all of that space would be taken up. Imagine, right? You was talking earlier. If you have a gym, but then you have to go from the gym to Indies to go get you some food to eat. Right? It makes no sense, right? So what if you had a grocery store with fresh produce and you had the capability to be able to live a healthy life? It's kind of crazy.
It would sound like a little bit like right? You know what I mean? I mean, and my point is always, it would sound almost like what I want, right? And so, you know, when we're having that conversation about the YMCA, to me, that's so crucial because what I'm asking for are resources. What I'm asking for are wages. What I'm asking for is food. But But what you give me is this
Right.
Band-Aid.
Right.
Right? It's this sort of like, oh, well, here's this like little solution, right?
There you go.
And
Give you something to do.
But that's not what I asked for.
Exactly.
Right? And so then how do we, again, get continually wrapped up in these cycles, because that whatever investment wasn't what I asked for, and then it benefits and pays you.
Right.
Right? So
Right.
then again, where's me in this entire
Right.
conversation?
Right. And it benefits or pays you whether win or lose, right? Because
Win or
it's not only
lose.
a tax benefit, but then
Right.
also if in the event it doesn't do well and you have to default on it, then therefore
Right.
you still get paid
Exactly.
because now you've taken a loss.
And now there's a PR campaign, right, that says, but I've done so much
But
for
I've
you.
done so much for you.
I'm this
aren't
benevolent,
you
aren't
grateful?
you happy?
deal.
You know, yeah, I mean, hey, like, why can't these Sambos just be, no. It's
crazy, but that's like you
this
said.
conversation, right? But that to me is the importance of this is don't get confused then by the narrative.
Right.
Right? This is the narrative that we've seen again and again. What's powerful is we learn these tools and mechanisms, right? So then when this narrative hits us,
Right.
we're not confused or bamboozled by it, right?
Exactly.
You know, I know exactly what's going on
I
here.
know exactly. And that's one of the big things in which we're really mindful of when we start talking about the narrative of the West, because when you only promote media that suggests so much crime is happening in the West, they're just killing one another, but you don't promote all of the activities that churches are doing or that community service groups are doing in order to ensure that children have stuff to do, that people are being fed. Like when children are out of school for the summer, where are they going to get food? Because if lunch is the only time that they eat at school, then what are they doing? I mean, there's so much other stuff that's going on, but we don't promote that because, again, we want to control the narrative.
Exactly.
Because if I control the narrative, then I can justify why policy is made. I can justify
can
stop and frisk. I
exactly.
can justify stopping you.
Over policing.
I can justify those things
that there.
because you are dangerous and you need protection.
And I can control your property values, right?
Most
and so if
certainly.
I can keep your property values depressed, and then I can attach on a narrative of violence and danger, imagine when my capital is no longer flowing. Right, I then have a ready prime market right there to then flip it, gentrify it, and put things that I want to have invested in, right?
Exactly.
And so
We're not going to say beat your terrorists, but just
you know, things happen.
sounds
I'm not petty,
right.
but yeah,
Okay.
but really,
I mean, but that's like I said. I mean, the ability to be able to control, to make policy, to showcase. Hey, listen, you are too dangerous for yourself. So we're going to police you. We're going to make certain that you don't do certain things, and we're going to hold your property value low. But now, if we come and redevelop it, all of a sudden, what was $30,000 in value
Dollar
is
bills.
now $100,000 in value,
Right.
all because you don't live there no more.
Right.
And that's nothing new.
And where did this money come from, right? When folks in the community were asking for resources, right? They couldn't get those resources. They
Exactly.
couldn't get that capital investment, right? And so then again, we have to have conversations. Again, and to me, this is to bring it back. This is the American project, right? It has always been, if we're going to take the dual threads of slavery and settler colonialism, right, and the expansion of borders, then we're always having those two conversations. What is the exploitation, extraction, right? But also then what is this expansion of markets and territory that always has to be available to me, right?
Wow.
Those are then the two prongs of even creating, right, like an economic base.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
I have to have, I mean, if I have free labor and free land, right, then imagine the capital accumulation.
Imagine the capital that I could get from that.
Exactly.
So here's the next pivot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
let's
we
go.
move. We talk about how policy is created. We talk about how people are treated. Now we want to talk about how God works,
Yay.
right? So, right.
right. It's like,
Exodus 3:7-10, it says, Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, all them zites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And what I love about this is because God claims his people, God sees his people,
Right.
God hears his people, and God will deliver his people.
Right.
But in the words of Reverend Dr. Wendell Griffin, when he came, man, I'm talking about, he blew my mind with this statement. He came and he said, God doesn't do the if work. God does the then work. Meaning, if we don't do our part, if we don't get up and mobilize and do what we need to do, then God will, right? I mean, wait. If we don't, then God won't. But if we do, God will. So what are some of the conversations that you're hearing? Like what is like the next steps in the space where you're in? I mean, academia, but then also in your social circles that folks are talking. How do you have, what are the conversations that are talking about what do we do now? The now what? What's next? Like what's happening?
Yeah, and if I could borrow your framing, right? Like, so for me, it's always the conversation. And if I'm taking even from the scripture, right? It's what I try to amplify is that as Black people, we're always already enough. Right. To me, that is what that is already kind of like positioning us. We're always already, right? Like, and so this conversation of if, right? I mean, and for me, it's like, if I can love myself, right, then I can do something for my community, right? If we're understanding that, hey, you know what? Before this transatlantic slave trade, there was no understanding of Black identity, of a Black diasporic experience, right?
There wasn't a need for it.
There wasn't a need for it, right? And so if we're understanding, then, okay, cool. If we've been put in this position, right, then how do we recognize and treat each other?
That's right.
That for me is the conversation that I'm having, right? Is that then, so how are we able to say, okay, you know what? Understanding all things being equal, right? They don't see me as human, but how between us can we see each other as human?
Reconcile that and repair that relationship that we see one another as brother and sister.
As human beings on this, right? Whatever, however you want to define that. And to me, I always go back to Malcolm X, right? And people have a lot of feelings and perspectives, but I always go back to this quote where he says, you know what? I don't care what color you are, as long as you're trying to change the condition of oppressed people on this planet, right? I'm with you, right? And so for me, that's the conversation is, if I can love myself, then, right, how can I share that with other people? Right. If I can understand this context, this history, if I can engage myself, then what does that mobilize me to do? What sort of world would I want to create?
I love how you put that, because you helped me to step up a step back, because all too often I'm so quick to start talking about, let's look at one another as brother and sister. Well, there's a step before that. Let's look at one another as just being human. Let's put the human perspective in that, because before I can even acknowledge you as brother, I first got to see you as human. And we've done a great job of dehumanizing Black people, brown people, oppressed people, anybody that is outside of the box of what we call normal, if there's such a thing.
And how abusive, right, to bring this back to where we're talking about, how abusive is that narrative of normal? Right? That becomes a control mechanism, right? If you deviate from this, right? And we see this in Black communities all the time. If you come from a single parent home that's ran by a woman, right? Like, all these things then become, oh, well, then you know you're somehow off from this norm. And we get right back at this conversation
and we get
control.
even into the space of hurting ourselves when we start talking about, you're not Black enough. Right?
I'm going to dim my light, right? So that I can be some form of this sort of like normal. I really do. To me, that sort of critical piece of understanding what's really going on, what are we doing, I think is always really, really valuable.
Man, listen, I love this conversation. We are almost out of time, and so I just want to pause real quick to let you know, listen, let's continue the conversation. So follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm hip. So IG, follow us on IG at SSC Live. And most certainly, if by chance you have any questions, if you don't want to comment on the social media network, send us an email via info@ssclive.org. And like I said, and if by chance they want to continue the conversation with you, how would they converse with you via email?
Email's probably the best. I'll say, like, just keep it through my UCI as a grad student. So you can do cbriscoe@uci.edu, and you can actually email me that way, and I'll more than likely respond.
Most certainly. Because email is one of those things.
I was like, but look, if you got a question, Google me.
Most certainly. Listener, thanks so much. We'll be here same time next week, same place, right here in the booth. It's your boy, Cory, your host. Love you all. See y'all later. And y'all know what I'm about to do. We out of here.
Thank you for having me.